So good evening, everybody. Welcome to an evening conversation with Luke Wilson, who is the CEO of A Rocha Canada. Tonight is a joint gathering of the Ottawa Christian Forum Campus Chaplaincy and InterVarsity Fellowship at the University of Ottawa and the Graduate Christian Fellowship. And we're also joined by Paul Heinzman and Daniel DeGrossier and Brendan Kong, leaders of those groups as well. And our hope for tonight is to have a conversation about creation care and ponder the place of creation care within a gospel witness. And A Rocha Canada is one of the organizations that we can turn to for their leadership within this conversation for the church and for culture. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity to be able to invite somebody from A Rocha to join us in conversation and to pick his brain a little bit and to hear his story and discover a little bit more about A Rocha, and also consider maybe not only ways that we can care for creation, but ways that we can get involved in some of the efforts that A Rocha is doing. Professor Paul Heinzman from the University of Ottawa is also the local leader of the Ottawa chapter of A Rocha. And so when we finish, we're going to also touch base a little bit on ways that you can also connect with the Ottawa A Rocha scene. So let's turn this to Luke Wilson. Luke comes to us from Hamilton, Ontario. And Luke is the CEO of A Rocha Canada, but he's been working with A Rocha Canada in other capacities before that. This has kind of worked his way up the ladder to take this role. Luke is married to the lovely Lindsay, and they have, now I'm gonna have to, just two children, or is there a third one there somewhere that I may have missed?
We had a miracle third.
Okay, so there is a third one that I've missed along the way. And
these two.
They live in Hamilton, Ontario, and I had the fortune of first meeting Luke in 2014 at the Windstone Farm outside of Carleton Place, home of our mutual friend Kirsten Jeffrey Johnson, who also has a passion for caring for the environment and thinking about the intersection of theology and creation care. And Luke was there, and he was doing talks on some of the space around the farm there, and also participating in a conversation about reading. And I was delighted to make his acquaintance and quickly appreciated his spirit and his heart for God's world. And it excites me to see how he's invested in A Rocha, and I am so pleased that you're able to join us tonight. Welcome, Luke.
Thank you, Sid. Very generous intro. Hope I can live up to that.
Luke, I thought maybe we could just begin by hearing a little bit about your journey and how you first got involved with A Rocha.
Yeah, and let me just say welcome to my attic. It's nice to be in your homes. This is my third story here in Hamilton, and you might hear kids in the background throughout. So if anything's garbled or jumbled, or I kind of take a jump, just ask me to say it again. But it's great to be with you all tonight. Thank you so much for welcoming me into this circle. And yeah, I mean, I bring greetings from loads of people across Canada who have a deep heart for this work. And we certainly love working with folks in schools and university. I think there's so much excitement around the people who are eager to learn about this intersection of faith and environment or creation. And so, I think my journey kind of starts there in some ways. I could go back and tell you all my family history stuff, and there are some threads there, both grandfather and father worked in environmental corporate jobs, much more manufacturing based. And when I was in your stage of life, I was privileged enough to go to Southeast Asia with my university. And I remember being in the Philippines and kind of having all these new experiences and getting to see the world in a different way. And I took with me a book by Brian Walsh, who's connected to InterVarsity, I think in Toronto, and called Colossians Remixed. And through that book, I discovered this whole new theology for me, where the work of Christ wasn't just about my soul being taken somewhere else. It was this amazing work for all of God's creation. So you see that in Colossians. I've got it next to me. I'll probably read it at some point. But how did that get me to A Rocha? I think that kind of put me on this exploration of trying to bring together my deep commitment to faith and my love for the world and this place and the creatures in it, the frogs and the birds and the trees and the forest. And I think it was 2 years later that I was in between jobs in Vancouver, and being a good, responsible, 20-year-old, was enjoying the summer, sailing and hiking and not looking for work, but just kind of waiting to see what would happen next. And somebody said, "Oh, you know what? I've heard that you like this environmental stuff and you're committed to your faith. You should go check out this A Rocha place in South Surrey, right near the border of Washington and close to White Rock, if you're familiar with that area." So I went out at the end of the summer in 2009 to what was then our field study station, and was welcomed by this community of diverse people who really took their faith commitment seriously and had a deep love for God's world and the place that they were in and caring for it. And I just kind of sat back. I remember being in that place under the Douglas fir trees outside, eating lunch with a whole bunch of people around a harvest table, something we now kind of go, oh, we can do that, or we could do that at one point. And I sat back and kind of went, these are my people. This is my place. And that sort of kicked off my journey of being committed to this mission of responding in an act of worship to the gift of God's creation. And what do you do when you have this gift? How do you respond to that? How do you demonstrate your love back for God as creator? Well, you care for this place. And so the journey up until this point has been figuring out what that looks like in a whole different, a whole wide variety of contexts and ways, from Vancouver over here to Ontario, and now both getting the opportunity to lead our Canadian work and connect with our international work as well, all around this connection of faith and environment, and focused in on biodiversity conservation. So I think I'll leave it there for now, Sid, and hand it back to you for questions or next question.
Well, I think that you set the stage for saying you got drawn into this community that you called home, and these people who shared this love of creation and love of God, and that's an intriguing and inviting thing. We've got people here who this is their first time maybe even hearing about A Rocha. So as you got introduced to this community of people, you got to learn about who A Rocha is. And so I'm wondering if maybe you can tell us, what is it that makes A Rocha so great, and its mission and vision that you were drawn into?
Yeah, great question. I think that, I could go through all the organizational language but I'm going to spare you from all those kind of, the rote responses, and just kind of go off my heart and say, I think you find something unique in A Rocha that you don't see necessarily in the environmental realm right now. You find a hope, and that's the hope of Christ. Um, and it's something that's so important, I think, in that space, because there's a lot of despair. None of the stats look good when it comes to the fate of our planet. Um, and there's a lot of grief and lament, and we've tried so many different things, and it just seems to be getting worse. And yet in A Rocha, you still find hope. And it's not that we're ignoring all that stuff, but it's the fact that we're rooting ourselves in a different story. We're rooting ourselves in a story of a God who loved the world, made it, sent, embodied himself, incarnated himself in the world because he loved it so much, and has a plan for the future of it, reconciling the whole world to himself, right? And that's a story that you can find hope in, even amidst the despair and the stats and all the rest. So I think, to answer that question a bit more specifically, Sid, I think that's what people kind of discover through A Rocha. And it's not always because of something we've done. I think it's the movement of God's Spirit and sort of finding resonance with other people who go, oh yeah, this makes sense. I was looking for this. And so we try to embody that in the places where we are, through community, sharing meals together, doing hands-on work, and then listening to each other's story, the grief and lament, and the joy and the wonder and excitement, and holding those things together. And I think that's kind of why we have a place in the conservation community and in the Christian community, because of that hope in Christ.
So tangibly, how does that look? Like, what do you do?
Yeah. So our areas of focus, I guess you'd say, we often talk about three words: conservation, environmental education, so there's two, and then agriculture. And so these are ways that we are expressing love for God's creation. So it could look like going into a watershed or a complex of streams, and looking for different species that are there, counting them, seeing whether it's a healthy population of species, and recording that for the long term. So coho salmon, Salish suckers are an endangered species in the watershed in British Columbia where we work. That's kind of the conservation side of things. And once we start to learn and get to know a place, by listening, by monitoring, by studying, we can discover ways that maybe we can have a hand in helping it flourish. We try not to play God, and that can be tough in the conservation space, because you want to fix it. But we really try and listen and pay attention to what's going on, and see if there's restorative action that we can take, whether it's planting native plants or advocating for that species to be protected from different pollutants. That's kind of the conservation side. The environmental education side is wide reaching, from young kids coming and exploring the forest, getting to touch different creatures, whether it's picking up a frog or a dragonfly and getting to kind of examine it. It's all around that wonder and delight in creation. That's our education programming. And we span the spectrum from kids to young adults. We have an internship program for young people, all the way to seniors and people with mental health challenges. So it looks different in every place because it's a response to that environment, that place, that watershed, the people who are there. So sometimes that gets confusing for people because they go, what do you do? And we have all these different things we do, but it's really rooted around conservation, education, and in some places, engagement with food. And the result, or the reason for that is food is such a accessible way into the conservation conversation. You know, there's a growing interest in understanding local food and the impacts of food and agriculture, and so it's a way to enter the conversation, and it really does ground us and root us in a place, getting to harvest food and grow food, and being it centers you around being around the table, and a sense of community and belonging. So that's often part of the A Rocha experience as well. And then finally, I just say, again, around the world, it looks very different. You know, in India, we're working with elephants to try and prevent them from damaging crops and killing people as well when they're moving through a place. In the UK, we've got a pretty huge program that engages churches called Eco Church with their buildings and their theology around creation care. In New Zealand, we're working with shorebirds and trying to prevent predators from stealing eggs in the nests of shorebirds. And so it's diverse around the world because God's creation is diverse.
So when I hear you talk, it might be easy to say, oh, so this is for scientists and for, you know, people who study environmental studies, and that's who this is geared to. But my experience has been quite different from that. This is all kinds of different people getting involved in it. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it kind of birthed out of the combination of a pastoral heart and a citizen science interest and eye. Our founder was an avid birder and a pastor, Peter Harris. So you see these two loves coming together, love of people, love of all creation coming together. And I think that's why there's more than just scientists represented, and we need the collective of voices and diverse, you know, experiences to sort of to help shape our expression of care in a place, I think. So yeah, it definitely has a conservation you know, thin edge, but then beyond that, we have quite a range of people who are part of A Rocha because, you know, they find a sense of belonging and connection, and we try and practice hospitality, and everyone needs to be involved in this kind of conversation to help us move in the direction that we pray and hope God's moving the world.
So sometimes when I start talking about environmental care, creation care within the realm of the church, I get pushback. There are those who say, listen, we're supposed to be a people of the gospel, and, you know, if we start messing around with environmental care and some of these different types of social justice actions, you know, we've got more important matters. You know, we've got to let people know about Jesus. So why are you wasting time with that? There's a certain skepticism that comes with marrying environmental care as a gospel initiative and a gospel priority. So how do you respond when you hear that type of language coming from people?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that can take so many different forms. We used to get it a lot 10 years ago. I'd say the tide has shifted in the kind of feedback and engagement we get, or maybe we're just not talking to those people as much as we used to. But I think with the way that the Catholic Church has pressed into this topic. The Pope's taken some leadership on this. The Anglicans have been involved for a long time, Mennonites, like whole areas of the church and the evangelical community through Luzon. There's been a huge shift, I think, over the last 15 to 20 years, and a concerted effort by lots of influential voices across the world. But you still do have the people who, if they're not voicing their skepticism, there's still that element, like you described, Sid, of well, it's just not as important. Why we should be doing one thing, and that's secondary. And so that kind of division, I think, fundamentally stems from our worldview and philosophy, and this dualism of separating the material and the spiritual world, and that's embedded in our Western thinking. So it's hard to actually influence that, because it's such a core part of how we experience the world. So you have to meet people where they're at, I think, is partly how we respond. And so I think if somebody's really passionate about justice, you can take a justice angle and talk about how caring for God's creation is a justice issue. There's people that have been displaced and have to migrate and lose their homes because of flooding, and why is flooding happening, and you can kind of engage that side of things. I think I've lost my train of thought now. I guess the other angle that we often engage is the experiential side. So, like, let's not get into the argument. Come and experience the wonder of God's creation. Let's do some work together. Let's get our hands dirty. And in that process, I think, both by God's Spirit and that experience, people start to ask questions, and you can have different kinds of conversation around why gardening could be an act of worship, and it takes time. So it's never something that I respond, or it's never something that I expect to change in that moment. It's a journey for people, and we sometimes joke about a second conversion, and that was certainly my experience, of kind of this aha moment where you realize that the work that God's doing is actually for the frogs too. It's for the birds too, and that does take a significant leap to get there. So I think you have to be gentle with people and listen to where they're at, and engage them with something that really rings true, whether it's a childhood experience of camp and being in the forest, or maybe it's somebody who loves hunting, and some of the hunters I know are the best conservationists as well, and you can enter the conversation that way. So I feel like I'm rambling a little bit on that one, but it's not easy. I'll say that, and I think our model is really experience based. Like, get to know a place which fosters love and care, and then you point people to God through that experience.
I guess it really shouldn't surprise us that experience is the key to that, considering that we worship a God of incarnation who embodies experiencing things with people, that true transformation takes place in the experience. Which leads me to wanting you to talk a little bit about experience within the realm of some of the things you guys are doing. I wish that the Cedar Haven Eco Center was closer to Ottawa. It would make it easier for us to actually, as an entire group, be sitting, on the property and listening to you talk in that. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the story of Cedar Haven and the type of experiences that you're trying to create by using something like that as a catalyst for conversation.
Great question. So I'll see if I can paint the picture of Cedar Haven a little bit. So when you leave the city of Hamilton, you're kind of leaving the corner of Lake Ontario, or the end of Lake Ontario, and you're going up the escarpment and onto kind of these almost moraine-like features, rolling hills. So Cedar Haven's, in that context, it's kind of this rural suburban combo. Like there's some mega mansions in pockets, and then there's lots of farms, and it's kind of right in the heart of Guelph, Cambridge, Hamilton, Burlington, Milton. It's centered in all these different large cities around Southern Ontario. So when the board was discerning how to grow in Ontario, there was already a pocket of A Rocha people here in Hamilton, and they were looking to start up something, and at that time, one of those people had come across Bill and Linda Hendry, who owned Cedar Haven and still do. And they, by providence, had been looking for of this place. And what they saw in it was just an amazing combination of forest, of meadow, of some farmland, and just a really special place. And so they had tried to find partners who would carry on this vision of caring for the place and having it be used as an experiential education center. They're both teachers, and so they wanted, kids to learn about God's creation through this place. And so they stumbled across us, and they went, wow, like this really fits. We want to protect and care for this place, and we want to see it be used. And so they approached us and said, we'd like to gift this to you, and we think the vision really resonates. So that was back in 2013, 14. And it's been an amazing journey. It's a place that has huge conservation value. So that's part of why we said yes. There's tons of biodiversity, so a mix of different creatures living there, like 50 to 60 different kinds of bird species that go through, 15 dragonflies and damselflies, a bunch of endangered bees, and the scientists tell me 26 different ecotypes. So that's a significant number for them. I'm not sure exactly how to frame that, but it's a lot in the context of diversity. So we thought it was a good place to root ourselves in Hamilton. And from there, we went about sort of learning and testing different models of engagement. We did a BioBlitz there, which is going through an area and trying to count all the different species in that area to see what kind of diversity is there. We did a lot of community events around food and workshops, beekeeping, a little bit of gardening, lots of birding. There's a endangered species called the eastern bluebird, and so we've got some habitat set up for that. And right now, what we do there is two key programs. So one is called Nature Academy, and it's from 4 to 9 in terms of age. And these kids basically are doing outdoor school, getting to learn about God's creation and experience the river and the forest and the farmland and the meadows, and doing kind of that hands-on, tactile, experiential education. And we have, we have lots of kids who they leave crying because they've had such a good time. They don't want to leave. You know that moment from your childhood, right? So that's one of the experiences. The other is with folks who have mental health challenges. And man, that program is incredible because you see people come alive in a new way just by getting out of a van and looking at the vast amount of green space. We almost don't need to do anything in terms of a program. God's creation speaks for itself when those folks come up, and getting to pick a wildflower, or touch a horse, or experience the fresh air and the cool forest. All those sort of tactile sensory things have a healing component, and we see new relationships fostered between the folks who come up, and a real passion for going back to their place and rediscovering their neighborhood and community. So those are kind of the two core programs that we do at Cedar Haven, and we're trying to grow into the conservation work. There's lots of partners that are involved in that. Redeemer University, we have conservation authorities, so we partner with the Conservation Authority, and just trying to figure out what is the best conservation project to take on at that site. So we're still kind of transitioning from getting to know the place to what are the restoration projects that we should be doing there.
So I want to get into talking about opportunities and ideas that you would have of ways that students could get involved. But before we go to that, I want to open it up to the crowd here to be able to chat with you and to be able to ask any questions that they might have pertaining to A Rocha or a theology of the environment, or any of those types of questions, or something that's piqued their interest in what you've talked about so far. And so I'm going to open it up to anybody who has a question for Luke. Go ahead, Aiden.
Sure. So earlier you mentioned that there is hope because of Jesus even in environmental matters. Does that hope extend beyond being a Christian to non-Christians, or is that simply a hope that we can have that we're told to take care of the earth and kind of live in harmony with nature, but then it's going to kind of pass away or change into something else later, and kind of those that don't have that hope aren't necessarily privy to the full extent of that hope? I don't know if you could just elaborate on that a bit.
It's a good first question. Wow. Well, there's a whole theological question embedded there, but I'll speak to the A Rocha part of that. I think our approach to engaging non-Christian community is one of welcome and hospitality, and so our story of hope we extend to environmental circles that aren't Christian, and we actually find that there's often a moment where their paradigm shifts because they've thought that Christians were the problem, and so we go, no, like, we're participating in this with you, and here's why. It's because of our faith that we're actually doing this work. It's because of our hope that we're doing this work. What other story do I want to share? Yeah, I think I think the other fascinating thing that we find in this work and taking a posture of hope is we do get to have conversations that are faith-based and around sharing Christ. And I think our model of engaging that conversation is not to force it, not to proselytize, but we speak through the work that we do. And then when we're invited into those conversations about sharing the hope of Christ, we take those opportunities. And so there's kind of a both and. There's the bigger narrative of here's why we do the work. It's from this posture of hope. And we're not afraid to share that. And actually we find it's a real strength in the environmental world. And then there's the more particular, in the day-to-day work with Christians and non-Christians together. We have amazing opportunities because people see a genuine expression of Christ embodied in creation. It's that incarnational presence, being faithful in a place, caring for it, caring for the people. That's what leads to conversations where we can share Christ. And so, in terms of what's the fate of creation and the fate of non-Christians, my theology is such that I believe God wants to redeem and restore all creation. And so I don't know how that's going to work exactly, but there's a pretty cool vision in Revelation of heaven coming to earth. And so, that's a whole other theological conversation, but that excites me. And I think it's probably more, it's got way more inclusiveness than I could probably imagine. So I'll probably leave it at that. You can see some of the flavor of my theology, but that'll be a whole other question I'm sure Sid and others can embark on.
We can spend a lot of time on that one. Next question. I see a hand over from Drew or Seth.
That would be me. So, hi, I was just wondering, what new opportunities have occurred because of the pandemic, and we can't necessarily go to the same places like we used to before, with the same people. How have you been innovative in trying to share your message to new groups, even if they can't physically be there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question, Drew. Thank you. I think I want to start with our international work. I think we've been blessed to the playing field's level right now. You can go anywhere in the world right now and get a story and get to visit. And so I think just internally in A Rocha, we've got a chance to meet new people across the A Rocha family, brothers and sisters who care about this work, and see the stories come to life. And I think we've tried a few things as well to make it a bit more accessible. We've done the Zoom programming like you all have done. We've done something called A Rocha Talks, where we bring a panel of people together of diverse backgrounds and talk about a topic. And the hands-on stuff is really tricky to do in a digital way. You can't do it. But because we've been able to do a lot of things outdoors and distance, we can still do some of the conservation work that way. Yeah, I think in terms of where we're going and some creative ideas, as I suspect some of your communities have engaged, the whole area of diversity and systemic racism is huge. And I think there's lots of opportunity for us to be involved in that conversation. When you talk about Indigenous land and the kind of connection between Christianity and Indigenous story, we have lots to learn there. And so we had Cheryl Bear come in and give a talk at our team gathering. Sid smiling, he knows Cheryl. So we've tried to learn more about how we can help guide that conversation, and I think we're learning ourselves, how to do that better, and in areas where we haven't done it well, and confessing that. And yeah, so we've learned a lot on that topic this year. Oh, and then I guess one more that I should mention. We've started conversations about a partnership with our U.S. Sister organization, A Rocha USA, and they're different than us because they haven't had sites and centers to kind of focus their attention, whereas we've had these sort of pretty intensive capital is the wrong word, but like buildings and places where we own and we work. They just haven't had that in the US. So they've been forced to figure out how to do A Rocha in a decentralized and in a non sort of property based way. And so I say all that context just to say they've got a program called Love Your Place, and we're talking about how to partner on that and roll that out both in Canada and the US. And that's more for households. And how can a household get involved in, or a small community get involved in caring for their place? And so we're going to provide that community some tools, a place for dialogue and discussion and inspiration. And that's an online tool and an online forum for engaging creation care. But I suspect that there's going to be so many new ways and opportunities as your generation starts to influence and lead organizations that have been not necessarily in the digital space in the same way that you've just sort of grown up in that way. So lots more opportunity there.
Hannah or Maya?
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you for speaking. I wanted to ask, as someone who's helping to plan events for OCRCC and maybe in the future other campus groups, what kind of events do you think would be beneficial to host to encourage what A Rocha is all about and encourage more focus and attention onto environment?
Sorry, can you say the end of that, Hannah? I couldn't hear you at the end.
What kind of events would be beneficial to host for students on campus to promote the same values as A Rocha and to promote attention and on the environment in a faith-based setting or just a student university setting? That's not that can be done throughout the year to bring more attention to A Rocha. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, it's great.
I'm going to jump in there and just say, let's hold that question. Let's hold that question. I see, because we're going to come back to that, and it's going to tie into me bringing Paul into the conversation. Nolani, you had your hand up.
So you touched a bit on the dichotomy between the church and environmental movements. So in your opinion, why do you think on average the church is reluctant on getting on board with this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. And I hope I communicated as well that I think there's a huge change happening in the church as there's generational shifts, and there's ton of Christian communities who are pressing in. So I do want to say I think there is some leadership there, but with the resistance, I think there's both a theological and a philosophical reason for resistance, and I highlighted some of that already, but I think the theological one is rooted in probably starting some of our theology further into Genesis than the very beginning of Genesis. You know, if you start your theology with sin and the world is bad, then it kind of has a certain narrative. If you start your theology with God as creator and he created something really good, you're off on a different track. And it, you know, that's where God's love for his creation starts in Genesis. We see that. So I think that's part of the theological piece. I think the more philosophical one is that dualism that I talked about, like our body and our soul being disconnected and our soul going somewhere else into heaven. And that's kind of a I think that's framed from our Western philosophies, not necessarily from Judeo-Christian root. And breaking that down is going to be hard. So I think, and then the final part of it is like, what do we believe about how the world is going to end, or not? How will it be redeemed and carry on? So that eschatology, like end times theology, is another thing that kind of throws us off in this conversation. So it's tricky to unpack it all, and I think we've dabbled in that space a little bit, but we've also left that to the theologians and the academics who are doing amazing work, and we've really focused on come experience God's creation, learn what it means to worship God as an act, like learn what it means to care for creation as an act of worship. So I'd love to chat more about that one with you, but that's probably all I could do. Sid's got other questions.
Well, I want to come back to Mim's question, because I think this is a good spot for us to invite Paul Heinzman in. And Paul heads up the local A Rocha, and I think there's some connection to what you're talking about, things that you might learn from the A Rocha USA group. There's a certain reality within the Ottawa region where we're not tied to one location in place with respect to A Rocha as well. So Paul has been leading A Rocha activities in Ottawa for quite some time now. And I wonder, Paul, if you can introduce us to A Rocha Ottawa, and then also move us to the conversation about specifically what are some things that we can start thinking about in terms of how to engage the University of Ottawa community in the conversation of creation care and A Rocha.
Are you able to allow me to share my screen?
I do believe I made you co-host already. Oh, no, maybe I didn't. Let me just do that. You're good to go.
Okay, just got to find the right PowerPoint presentation. Just give me a second here. Nope. I'm at the last slide. There we go. Gotta go up to the beginning. Okay, so thanks, Sid. So A Rocha has 3 C's, and Luke has talked all around these. So I'll just briefly go over them: Christian, conservation, and community. Luke is talking about these things: cross-cultural and cooperation. Cooperation refers to working with other organizations that are not necessarily Christian, so I'll come back to that. But for the main thing that we've been doing over the years has been focused upon building community and educating. So we've been having events that anyone is welcome to attend, maybe about 6 or 7 times a year, generally at our place, which is adjacent to Gatineau Park. And Luke's predecessor, Marcoux, suggested that we use our property for this purposes. So here you see we have Stephen Boomer-Prediger, Lauren, Mary Ruth Wilkinson, Ian Provin, and also Tim and Tracy Lyon, urban farmers in Kingston, giving presentations. So usually these presentations have occurred after we've had a hike in the park, or we've gone for a cross-country ski. Then we've had a meal, like Luke was saying, the importance of food. Food is really important for developing community, but also for the connection with the earth. And then, so these speakers have generally educated us about caring for creation. But we tried to go beyond that. Well, I just give a few more, but these are the types of things we might do. For example, on a winter outing in the park, cross-country skiing, or just playing on the lake, or snowshoeing, or skating on the lake. One of the classic events that we've had for a number of years is the wildflower walk along the L'Oreal Trail. You can see all the trilliums here, and we bring guides along with us. And actually, if you go a little bit before the trilliums, we can see quite a greater diversity of wildflowers. But we're doing that every May. And another classic hike is in the fall, and doing the King Mountain Trail. And so Luke was talking about biodiversity. Here we're on the Lusk Escarpment. And this, you may not know this, this has the actual greatest concentration of rare plant species in the province of Quebec along the escarpment here. Or it's actually called the Early Escarpment, and Lusk goes down below. Look in the background here is where Ottawa is. And so we've also had a community garden at the University of Ottawa for about 6 years. And initially it was behind the Free Store on King Edward, and then it's moved over. This building here on the side is LeBlanc Residence. And back in here is Photo Hall. So you may have walked through this way and maybe never noticed it. There's another community garden, part of the university learning garden, that has some native species here. And so we started with 4 boxes, and we now have 9. So these 2 here, this is from 2 years ago, are turnips and carrots. These 3 here, and we have another couple back there. So, and Daniel was the one, we were away on sabbatical last spring. So Daniel was responsible for planting the garden last year, but we can always take volunteers, student volunteers who like to help out and to dig the garden, plant it in the spring, and then water it. That's really important. So we got water from a house over here on King Edward, and then watch it grow. And then we harvest, and we give the vegetables to the Ottawa Inner City Ministries. So that's a way to become involved. And I should say, the events that we have, the community and the hikes and the skis and the meals and education, anyone's welcome to come. If you don't have a vehicle, we can certainly arrange vehicles. And so the garden's a very easy way for someone on campus to become involved. Even if you're not going to be around all summer, you can certainly be involved earlier on, or for whatever part of the summer you are around. And then increasingly, because A Rocha is a hands-on organization, we're not just about talking about ideas. We've become more and more involved with citizen science through the Friends of Gatineau Park and Gatineau Park itself. Now, I had in my class this morning, I had the chief ecosystem scientist from Parks Canada, who's basically in charge and responsible for protecting ecosystems across the country at national parks. And he talked about citizen science. And citizen science is a way for individuals with no background to be involved in gathering data that then scientists and park staff will use in their monitoring and their conservation management of parks and other areas. So We've had people from A Rocha involved in loon monitoring in the park, in the lakes in the park. We've had people from A Rocha involved in the frog watch, so taking an inventory of frogs in the park. And Monarch Mission talks about, there's an event monitoring, gathering data on monarch butterflies in the park. And then for 3 years now, we've been doing invasive species removal in September. And so you see here, this area that has carpeting on it, that was from 2018. And that year, A Rocha individuals participated with other individuals with Friends of Gatineau Park on a Saturday. And the next year, the event was on a Sunday. So A Rocha worked in cooperation to have our own event on a Saturday, because most people from A Rocha are probably going to church on Sundays. And so you can see this area has been all cleared. I don't really have a good picture here of the periwinkle before it's removed, but back in there, just the whole area here, except for the trees, was covered in periwinkle. And then this past year, 2000, it was slightly modified with COVID, and people went in pairs at different times of the week. And then this winter, I'm not sure whether anyone at A Rocha was involved, but we certainly publicized it to the A Rocha members to become involved in animal tracking. And again, because of COVID, going out in small numbers and making observation of the animals. And so this is particularly important to look at the corridors linking the park with other natural areas surrounding the park. So that's really important now with biodiversity, is looking at connectivity and corridors between patches of natural habitat. So that's just a quick overview. Our next event might be the Wildfire Walk in May, but we'll have to see what happens about COVID. Right now, we can have groups of 8 in the park with a leader. So those are a few things, what we do, and how you might be able to come involved with the community garden at the university, or with the citizen science, or just come and participate, get to know some more people, and encounter other people that are really interested in creation care, and they come from all over Ottawa and Gatineau, from all sorts of different denominations.
Amazing, Paul. Wow.
So if you're interested in being involved in any of these things, or curious about keeping up on local A Rocha stuff, certainly you can talk to Daniel or myself or to Paul, and we can make sure that you get connected to the list of what's going on locally.
I should mention we have an email list that I send out announcements on. So if you want to be part of that email list, just send me your email and I'll add you.
And I think it would be great as far as the garden for this year, Paul. I assuming you want volunteers, and that'll probably get started in a month and a half's time, exam time period. We're starting to work at that.
Yeah, we usually begin in May, second week of May or so.
Daniel says in 2 weeks, hopefully. I think we're all getting ready to that point where we're ready for spring. And I just think for students that are going to be around this summer, to get on the roster of watering and doing a little bit of weeding, it's a valuable thing, and many hands make it an easy job, but it is also a very tangible way to have conversations with people. I remember 2 years ago when I was doing weeding in the garden, a colleague that works in health services happened to park nearby and was walking. She's like, "What are you doing here?" And it was an entire conversation about A Rocha and about creation care, and how my faith compels me to think about the place of food and to be connected to God's creation. And this was a way we could do it on campus. And those are valuable conversations that I think are great to be a part of. So certainly would encourage you to sign up to be a part of that this summer if you're around.
I should also say the university is very supportive. They really like us doing this. So I'm not sure in what other ways the university promotes or encourages Christian activity, but they are very encouraging of what we do.
Praise God.
But that does bring it back to Luke. Are there other ideas that you would say, what could a group of university students be doing, or or ideas that you'd say, you know, I've seen this done elsewhere on other campuses, even throughout the winter, as a way
Yeah.
of drawing attention to creation care?
Yeah. I don't know if book studies are still done, but I was going to suggest 2 books. So this one's our book about the story of A Rocha in Canada. And it's fantastic. It's fun. It's got lots of stories in it. It's whimsical, but it's deep, and it's got some theology embedded in it. So maybe a book study. I don't know if that's still done or not. And I just finished David Attenborough's book, which there's a documentary on Netflix about it, but this kind of fills in a whole vision for, you know, what could look different. How could we move in the right direction? So I'd recommend that one. It's pretty accessible. Yeah, I mean, you know, hosting guest speakers, I think, is a great thing to do. You'd be surprised at who will come and chat and talk. Even hosting somebody from an Indigenous community to talk about the land ethic that they have and find similarities in you know, their worldview and ours, and that could be a fascinating conversation, I think. What other events? Yeah, I've seen like green teams in universities who are responsible for, you know, whether it's sustainability, resource, you know, using resources wisely in the school, doing assessments around energy. I think you have to partner pretty well with the university to do that kind of thing, but I've seen that done. And maybe, you know, the other thing that we didn't really get to, there's a huge and growing need in the eco-anxiety space. There's a lot of people who feel anxious and worried, and that's real. And I'm not telling you to go be therapists, but I think maybe making a space for lament and grief fits with us as Christians. Like we can do that. We know how to care for people in those spaces. So I think there's a growing need there. I was just reading an article in The Walrus about eco-anxiety, and in the last 5 years, this counselor has gone from like a handful of clients who are coming to her for eco-anxiety to 30% of her practice being eco-anxiety based, because climate change is something that, you know, is huge and we don't know how to frame. And then we see these stories of the impact that it's having on the world, and it leads to real grief. And I think we have an opportunity to minister there. So that's probably the most significant thing that we could do, I think.
That's actually a really interesting idea, Luke. I'm making notes.
Awesome.
Any final thoughts, Luke? You've got this captive audience here of things that you would want to say before we finish up. It's about 7 minutes after 7, so we should be wrapping this up. But any final thoughts?
Oh, I wish I could get to know each of you and your story, and you know, just sit around and chat and hear your ideas as well. I wish that we could be together, because the Zoom format doesn't allow for that. That's sort of how I'm left, and just encouraged by your engagement in this. I think we can't underestimate the calling of Christians to be in this space, to listen and to learn and to lead in this space. So that's what excites me. That's what gets me up every morning. And there's a ton of people who share that. And I think it provides such a rich opportunity for moving into a type of way of life that makes your faith real every day, every single hour. And it's moved me in an incredible way to just, this is what my life's all about. And so, yeah, that's kind of the exciting part of this work. And I hope that for some of you, it relates to you as well. And if it doesn't, I'm sure it'll come across your path in the future, because, you know, it touches every sphere of life, the life that we share, and the interconnectedness of our world and life. So as we're finding out with a pandemic, right? Just the interconnectedness of life.
I have placed Paul's email address in the chat box. So if you want to get on the local A Rocha events list, it is in the chat box. You can take that email address, write it down, copy and paste it, whatever you want to do there, to get in contact directly with Paul. Or you can talk to Daniel or myself, and we can certainly put you in connection with Paul as well to be on the local list. And I would encourage you all to dream, to try things. Find those spaces, even within your local church, to think about something that generates conversation and gets people connected to the creation. I think it's such an important component of in a world that is increasingly consumeristic, to be reminded that this world is a gift, and we have to love it well and steward it. It's such a fundamental call for what it means to be human. So thank you, Luke, for your time tonight, for joining us here. And certainly we look forward to the time when you can have a meal with us and be in person and, tangibly be able to give you a big hug and all of that good stuff.
Can't wait to do it. Yeah. And I didn't plug our internships. I probably should have, but for those of you who are like in the science field and in environmental studies, we do some pretty stellar, intensive, like 2 to 3 month living in community, training you around environmental studies and conservation, and they're transformative experiences. So you can look up those online, but if you're kind of like, this is my jam, I'd encourage you to look into those internships.
And I know even you Ottawa students that have put in time at Cedar Haven, they all speak just so highly of that experience and the community that's involved there. So, but you can also look at the other places in Canada too as well. And if you're looking for a reason to be out in BC, that might be a great way to do something as well. And then the other location is Manitoba, correct? And those are the three?
Yeah, Winnipeg and East Braintree.
Okay.
Yeah, in Manitoba.
So thank you again, Luke.
As we maybe just when we were on sabbatical, we didn't go to the field study Brooksdale in Surrey as much as we hoped, but we were on 3 different occasions last year. And when we came back drove through across the country, we went to East Braintree, and we had a tour. And so one of our first events after COVID will be giving descriptions of our visits to these centers.
Cool. Oh, that's great, Paul.
So thank you again. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. And thanks everybody else for being a part of this really important conversation tonight. And I look forward to seeing you in future conversations like this.
Bless you all in your journey. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Luke.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Sid.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, all.